Imagine arriving in a new city, full of dreams and hope, believing that the world would finally open its doors. That was Zoe, a young woman who, as she set foot on American soil, believed her life was about to change for the better. But what she didn't expect was that prejudice and disdain would follow her every step. She arrived with a suitcase full of dreams, only to be met with indifferent stares, closed doors, and cruel laughter that tried to extinguish her hope. Every job interview, every attempt to find her place in the world seemed to turn into yet another lost battle. But despite the countless humiliations, Zoe refused to give up. Until one day, an unexpected opportunity appeared. A simple act of kindness and an offer for change. But would she have the courage to take the risk? This is the story of Zoe, a woman who faced the harshest rejections and found within herself the strength to fight for a new life. Get ready, because this story is going to deeply touch your heart. Zoe stepped off the plane in an American city with her heart pounding with hope and a suitcase full of dreams. The sky was clear and blue, and the warmth of the sun seemed to embrace her, as if telling her that anything was possible. She looked around, taking in every detail, the towering buildings, the hurried people, the cars speeding by. It was all so different from the place she had left behind, where hunger and prejudice shaped the lives of its inhabitants. Here, everything is going to be different, she thought, as she walked through the streets, her eyes sparkling with the expectation of a better future. However, as she ventured deeper into the city, reality quickly presented itself in a harsh way. Looks of disdain and indifference followed her wherever she went. The smile that once lit up her face began to fade. "You lost, girl?" a man at a bus stop asked, his tone mixing contempt with curiosity. Zoe swallowed hard, feeling humiliation settle in her chest. "No, I'm just looking for a place to stay," she replied, trying to maintain her dignity. Hours dragged by as she wandered in search of shelter and food. A rumbling stomach and the feeling of helplessness made the journey even harder. Passing by a restaurant, the smell of delicious food filled her nose, making her empty stomach twist in protest. She hesitated at the door, but was quickly met with a hostile glance from the hostess. "We're not hiring, and you don't look like you could afford this place anyway," the woman said, crossing her arms and shaking her head, as if Zoe were invisible. Embarrassed, Zoe quickly stepped away, feeling the sting of humiliation burn her cheeks. After several failed attempts to find shelter, Zoe sat on a park bench, watching the people around her. Couples laughed, groups of friends shared stories, and children played carefree on the grass. The contrast with her own loneliness was painful. With a heavy sigh, she closed her eyes and allowed herself to dream once more. "I will make it," she whispered to herself, her voice barely audible. "I have to." The following days were filled with job interviews. She showed up in her best clothes, a mix of items she had brought from home, which now seemed so worn compared to the stylish outfits of the other candidates. In each interview, a spark of hope bubbled up in her heart, but it was always followed by disappointment. "You have an interesting resume, but," began one interviewer, her expression full of disdain. "I think we need someone with a different look for this role." That sentence echoed in Zoe's mind for days, a cruel reminder that, often, appearance mattered more than skills. On another occasion, a clothing store manager looked her up and down before dismissively saying, "I'm sorry, but you don't fit the profile we're looking for." Frustration began to build inside her like a storm about to erupt. In another attempt, Zoe decided to apply for a job at a cafe. The manager, a middle-aged woman with a tired expression, looked Zoe over critically. "You don't seem to have experience, but I can give you a chance," she said, not hiding her reluctance. "If you don't do well, I won't be able to keep you for long." Zoe accepted the job, but even there, the disdain showed in the small things. The employees often ignored her questions and laughed at her mistakes. One of them, a slim blonde woman, loudly commented to the others, "She has no idea what she's doing." Those words cut her like sharp blades. Zoe felt that, with each passing day, her hope was slipping away bit by bit. After weeks of discouraging attempts, Zoe found an opportunity that seemed promising. A sign on a chalkboard outside a photography studio was advertising for a janitor. Maybe this will be different, she thought as she headed to the studio. The place was stylish, with walls decorated with impressive photos of models and artists. The smell of fresh paint and the sound of cameras clicking created a vibrant atmosphere. However, as she entered the interview room, Zoe quickly realized that the atmosphere of glamour didn't extend to everyone there. The manager, a middle-aged man with neatly trimmed gray hair, looked at her with a skeptical expression. "You know this job isn't glamorous, right?" he asked, as if trying to discourage her. Zoe nodded, determined not to let negative comments bring her down. "Yes, I understand. I just want a chance to prove myself." She was hired, although the manager's tone seemed reluctant. Deep down, Zoe felt that this could be the light at the end of the tunnel. Her first day was a whirlwind of emotions. As she cleaned and organized the space, she watched the photographers and models walk by, all of them seeming so confident and full of life. A burning desire to belong began to grow inside her. "If only I could be there instead of here," she thought, as she mopped the polished floor. But as the days turned into weeks, Zoe soon realized that her position was undervalued. The studio staff, for the most part, looked down on her. Papers were thrown on the floor intentionally, and laughter echoed as she bent down to clean. Zoe tried to ignore the taunts, focusing on doing her job the best she could. "One day, I'll show them," she muttered to herself as she cleaned a forgotten corner of the studio. Life at the studio was a constant struggle, but Zoe refused to give up. She dreamed of a future where she could shine, where her beauty and talent would be recognized. The desire for success was stronger than any humiliation she faced. At night, as she walked back to her small apartment, she looked up at the starry sky and promised herself that one day everything would change. "I'm more than they think," she repeated in her mind, steeling herself for another day. Zoe arrived at the photography studio with her heart racing, the anticipation mixed with anxiety that had followed her since she left her hometown. The sliding glass door opened, and she was greeted by an environment brimming with creativity, but also a certain atmosphere that made her feel like an outsider. The sound of cameras clicking and the lively conversations among the staff contrasted with the silence that seemed to follow her heavy steps. She forced herself to smile, but the expression quickly faded when she noticed the disdainful looks from some of the employees. "Look who's here," murmured a blonde woman with perfectly styled hair, sitting at the makeup table. "The new janitor. Let's hope she knows how to clean properly." The laughter that followed made Zoe's stomach turn. She settled into her new routine, trying to ignore the comments and focus on her work. Keeping the studio clean was simple enough, but the glares and sharp words followed her like shadows. In the first few days, Zoe dedicated herself to organizing the space, cleaning objects that seemed more valuable than she did. Microphones, cameras, equipment that cost more than she would make in years. But every time she finished a task, she found papers thrown on the floor, coffee cups left behind, forgotten food wrappers. It was as if they were doing it on purpose, like a cruel game where she always lost. "Hey, Zoe. Could you grab that paper over there?" a photographer called out, pointing to a corner far from where she stood. "I think you're closer." His tone was sarcastic, and the way he looked at her made her feel smaller. "Sure, I'll get it," she replied, keeping her voice steady, though her heart felt heavy. As she bent down to pick up the paper, she overheard the models talking in the background. They were discussing the latest fashion show, praising the beauty of a coworker, a famous model who had just passed by. Zoe remembered watching those women on TV, so confident, so beautiful. It was a world so far from the one she lived in. The day dragged on, and Zoe tried hard not to let the discouragement take over. The smell of cleaning products mixed with the aroma of fresh coffee coming from the kitchen. She decided that if at least the studio was spotless, maybe, in some way, she could find a reason to smile. So, while mopping the floor, she dreamed of a future where she wasn't just a janitor but a woman who could shine. That afternoon, as she was lost in her thoughts, a soft voice pulled her out of her introspection. "Hi, you're the new employee, right?" Zoe looked up and found herself face to face with a woman with wavy brown hair and a warm smile. "I'm Lisa. You're doing a great job here. The studio looks so clean." "Thank you," Zoe replied, surprised by the kindness. "I'm just trying to do my best." "I get it. You know, I've noticed that most people here don't pay much attention to what you do. It's sad, really. But don't worry, this industry can be tough, but it can also be full of opportunities." Zoe smiled shyly. "I just want to do my job and hope that one day things will get better." Lisa watched her for a moment, as if evaluating something beyond the surface. "Have you ever thought about modeling?" The question caught Zoe by surprise, and she laughed nervously. "Modeling? Me? No, that's not for me." "Why not?" "You have an interesting look, something that could convey emotions." "I'm a model, and I know appearances can be deceiving. Sometimes, beauty is hidden, just waiting to be discovered." Zoe felt a warmth rise in her cheeks. "I'm not sure I could do it. That world is so different from what I know." "You won't know until you try. What do you have to lose?" Lisa smiled encouragingly. "If you want, I can help. We can do a test shoot at the agency I work with. They're always looking for new faces." Zoe hesitated. The idea of being a model seemed like a distant, almost impossible dream. She thought about all the times she had been dismissed, how her appearance was often seen as an obstacle, not an advantage. "Do you really think I'm pretty enough?" "Beauty is much more than just looks," Lisa replied. "It's about confidence, attitude, and how you see yourself. What matters is how you feel inside. And I see something special in you." The conversation continued, and Zoe felt lighter, as if the weight of accumulated rejection had been slightly lifted. The connection forming between them was comforting. Lisa said goodbye, but left a seed of hope in Zoe's mind. She stood there, thinking about the model's words as she cleaned up the last bits of the day. However, reality soon crept back in. Her coworkers didn't stop making jokes and snide comments. One of them, a production assistant who usually ignored her, walked past and left an empty cup right in front of her, letting out a sarcastic laugh. "Hey, Zoe. Where's your superpower? Aren't you going to grab that?" Zoe took a deep breath, holding back the anger that was boiling inside her. "I'll grab it, yes. And one day, you'll be surprised at what I can do." The words came out of her mouth before she could think twice. The group paused for a moment, surprised by her boldness. But soon they went back to laughing, and the feeling of discouragement wrapped around her once again. At the end of the day, Zoe left the studio with a confused mind. Lisa's words echoed in her head, but the reality of her situation kept pulling her down. She dreamed of being something more, but insecurity was like an invisible chain holding her back. On her way home, she looked at the faces of people on the streets, the diversity around her, and felt that, somehow, she too could find her place here. But how? Zoe knew she had to make a decision. Lisa's offer was a path, but she was afraid of exposing herself, of failing again. If there was one thing she had learned on her journey, it was that the world could be relentless. However, at the same time, she felt that she needed to fight, not just for herself, but for all the women like her who faced prejudice and indifference every day. That night, as she looked into the mirror, Zoe made a promise to herself. She wouldn't let herself be beaten down anymore. If the opportunity was there, she had to take it. With a deep breath, she decided that when she got to the studio the next day, she would talk to Lisa about the test shoot. After all, every step into the unknown could be a chance to change her life forever. Zoe sat at the edge of her bed, staring into the mirror on a dusty wall. The reflection showed a tired young woman, but with an unmistakable spark in her eyes. She thought about Lisa's offer, the model who had complimented her and offered the chance for a test shoot at one of the city's top modeling agencies. Yet, insecurity gnawed at her. I'm just a janitor, she thought. What do I know about fashion? What if I'm not good enough? The sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating the small room where Zoe lived. The walls were plain, with no decorations, reflecting the simple life she led. But there was something there, a fire inside her that pushed her to dream. You can do this, she murmured to herself, trying to convince herself. But the voice of doubt still echoed in her mind, repeating the disdainful words she had heard during job interviews. Each no left her more insecure, as if she was stuck in a cycle of self-sabotage. That night, as she lay in bed, Zoe tossed and turned, thinking about what could happen if she decided to go to the casting. What if it goes wrong? What if I get ridiculed? Images of every humiliating moment she had ever experienced flashed in her mind like a movie on repeat, parade of faces that had looked at her with contempt or disinterest. She closed her eyes, trying to push those thoughts away, but they wouldn't leave. The next day brought the usual routine at the studio. Zoe worked hard, cleaning the floors, organizing equipment, and trying to ignore the mean comments from some of her coworkers. Look at the janitor, trying to be a model, one of them said, while the others laughed. But what bothered her the most was the indifference from her supervisors. She worked hard to prove her worth, but they treated her as if she were invisible. During her break, she sat alone at one of the tables in the studio's kitchen, watching the others. The smell of fresh coffee filled the air, but it wasn't enough to lift her spirits. When Lisa walked in, the model's presence brightened the room. Lisa had a special way of entering a place, as if the confidence she exuded was contagious. She approached Zoe and sat down beside her. Hey, are you okay? Lisa asked with a genuine smile. Zoe hesitated but found a bit of courage. I'm trying. Do you think I should go to the casting? I don't know if I'm the right type of model. Look, Lisa began, looking straight into Zoe's eyes, you have something special. I can see it. Don't listen to them. They don't know what they're talking about. You need to give yourself a chance. Lisa's words resonated inside Zoe, but doubt still lingered. But what if I fail? What do I do if I don't make it? What if you succeed? Lisa challenged. You'll never know the answer unless you try. Sometimes, the greatest opportunities are hidden in our biggest insecurities. Zoe thought about that as Lisa walked away, leaving her alone with her thoughts. The conversation made her reflect on what was really at stake. Every day, she fought to stay strong in a world that seemed determined to knock her down. But what if this was the chance she had been waiting for? The idea of seeing herself in a new role, as a model, awakened something inside her that had been dormant for a long time. That night, as she prepared for bed, Zoe decided she couldn't let this opportunity slip away. The insecurity was still there, but she knew she had to fight it. Tomorrow, I'll go to the casting, she said aloud to herself, as if it made the decision more real. What was the worst that could happen? Rejection? She was already used to that. But what if, just for a moment, she could shine? The day of the casting arrived, and Zoe woke up nervous, her stomach full of butterflies. She dressed in a simple outfit, but one that made her feel a little more confident. Looking in the mirror, she tried to see herself as Lisa had. I'm more than just a janitor, she repeated, taking a deep breath. I'm Zoe. When she arrived at the modeling agency, a mix of excitement and anxiety washed over her. The entrance was imposing, with glass walls and modern decor. Zoe hesitated at the door, watching the models pass by, all of them stunningly beautiful and full of unshakable confidence. "What am I doing here?" she thought, but an impulse pushed her forward. "You're here to show them who you are," whispered Lisa's voice in her mind. With that determination, Zoe stepped inside. The atmosphere inside was buzzing with energy. People were busy, chatting and preparing for the auditions. Zoe felt a little lost amidst it all, but she quickly realized she needed to focus on herself. When her name was finally called, she took a deep breath and walked into the room. Inside, Zoe was greeted by a panel of judges who looked at her with curiosity. The room was brightly lit, and the cameras were ready. The nervousness crept in again, but she remembered what she had decided. "I'm Zoe," she reminded herself once more, and then she began to walk. She stood in front of the cameras and started to pose, trying to channel all the strength she had built up in her heart. The judges' expressions were no longer of disdain, now there was a spark of admiration and curiosity. At one point, she found herself smiling, letting the confidence that was beginning to blossom flow through her. "I'm more than they thought," she realized, as the cameras clicked around her. After a few poses, Zoe felt a wave of freedom wash over her. It was as if, at long last, she was revealing herself to the world. The insecurities were still there, but they faded into the background of the determination that now guided her. At the end of the shoot, she overheard one of the judges murmur, "She has something unique." Those words were like a breath of fresh air, a confirmation that maybe, just maybe, she was on the right path. As she left the room, Zoe felt a weight lifted from her shoulders. The nervousness still pulsed through her body, but there was a new sense of possibility. She had given herself a chance. And although the future was uncertain, she knew that regardless of the outcome, she had taken the first step toward the life she had always wanted. The modeling test took place in a brightly lit studio, where the white walls reflected the intense light from the lamps. Zoe walked in nervously, her heart racing frantically. The people around her spoke in hushed tones, but she couldn't hear anything beyond her own thoughts. Anxiety wrapped around her like a fog, but there was something different about that moment. Something that made her feel like maybe, just maybe, she could stand out. The photographer, a woman with gray hair and a piercing gaze, called Zoe over. "You're Zoe, right? Let's begin," she said, in a firm, direct voice. Zoe nodded, swallowing hard. The photographer adjusted the camera, fine-tuning the lighting as Zoe tried to recall the advice Lisa had given her. "Be yourself," the model had said. "Show who you really are." When the first flashes started to light up the room, Zoe felt paralyzed. But as the photos were taken, a feeling of freedom began to rise within her. It was as if, for a few moments, she could let go of all the humiliations she had faced. With each click of the camera, Zoe allowed herself to be more authentic, more real. She began to move, to smile, to express herself. The photographer seemed to notice the change, which motivated her even more. "Yes, Zoe. Perfect. Keep going," the photographer exclaimed, as Zoe let herself get lost in the energy of the moment. The poses began to flow naturally, and she found herself in an almost meditative state, where all her insecurities were silenced by the passion she felt in that instant. By the time the shoot ended, Zoe was breathless, but at the same time, she felt whole. The photographer approached her with a smile that seemed genuine. "You've got something special, Zoe. I'm excited to see what comes next," she said, as Zoe nodded in gratitude, still trying to process everything that had just happened. After a few days of anticipation and anxiety, Zoe's phone rang. The sound echoed through the small apartment she had rented, and her heart raced. With trembling hands, she answered. On the other end, an excited voice greeted her. It was Clara, the agent from the modeling agency who had attended the test. "Zoe, is that you? I have amazing news," Clara said, her voice overflowing with excitement. "The brands loved your photos. They're really interested in signing a contract with you. Are you ready to take the next step?" Zoe was silent for a moment, trying to absorb the words. A mix of happiness and disbelief swept over her. "Really? This is incredible. I don't know what to say," she replied, her voice trembling with emotion. "Say yes. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, Zoe. You deserve this. Let's schedule a meeting to discuss the details. I'm so excited for you," Clara said, and Zoe could feel the agent's enthusiasm through the phone. As soon as she hung up, Zoe let the tears flow down her face. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. The memories of the humiliations she had faced at the photography studio haunted her, but now, she felt like this moment was a turning point. The life she had always dreamed of was finally within her reach. In the days that followed, Zoe focused on preparing for the meeting. She bought a few new clothes, something she had never done before. Each piece was a statement of her new identity, a way of breaking free from the limitations society had imposed on her. Looking in the mirror, she finally began to see the beauty that had always been there, hidden beneath the surface. On the day of the meeting, Zoe arrived at the agency with her heart racing, but determined. The studio was sleek and modern, with walls adorned with photographs of renowned models who had passed through there. Clara greeted her with a warm smile and led her to a conference room. "Zoe, I want you to meet some people from the marketing and PR teams. They're so excited to work with you," Clara said as she introduced Zoe to a group of professionals who looked at her with interest. The conversations flowed, and Zoe found herself immersed in a world that once seemed so distant from her reality. She talked about her experiences, her aspirations, and even though she felt butterflies in her stomach, she realized she was doing well. People listened to her with attention, and she began to believe that she truly had something to offer. After the meeting, Clara took her to a small office and, with a confident smile, handed her a contract. "Here it is, Zoe. If you sign, your world is going to change forever," Clara said, the excitement evident in her voice. Zoe looked at the paper, the signature line feeling like a monumental step. With the pen in hand, memories of the hardships she had faced flooded her mind, the disdainful looks from interviewers, the cruel words from coworkers, the sleepless nights wondering what could have been. But now, this contract represented more than just an opportunity, it was her chance to rewrite her story. "What do you think? Are you ready for this?" Clara asked, noticing Zoe's hesitation. "Yes," Zoe replied firmly. "I'm ready." Zoe was in a state of controlled euphoria, adrenaline pulsing through her veins as she thought about the twists and turns her life had taken. Her rapid rise to fame hadn't erased the memories of every insult and disregard she had endured at the photography studio. But now, a new feeling dominated her, the determination to make a difference. As she read the news about the scandal involving the studio owner, a man who had always treated her with disdain, her indignation turned into courage. The press conference room was packed with reporters and cameras, a sea of curious faces and notepads ready to jot down every word. The energy in the air was palpable, and Zoe felt a mixture of nervousness and empowerment. When it was her turn to speak, she took a deep breath, remembering all the hardships she had faced. The man who was about to be exposed wasn't just a name, he represented everyone who had tried to silence her. "My name is Zoe," she began, her voice steady, though a few tears threatened to fall. "And I worked as a janitor in a photography studio where I was disrespected and treated as if my presence didn't matter." She noticed some of the reporters' faces contort with surprise. "But I'm not just here to talk about myself. I'm here to talk about how this toxic environment perpetuates itself in the fashion industry. How prejudice and discrimination aren't just words, but experiences that affect the lives of many women, especially black women. Her words flowed like a river that had finally broken through a dam. The fear of being ignored or discredited faded with each sentence. I witnessed colleagues being harassed. I experienced disdain firsthand. And the truth is, many of us, who are marginalized, feel forced to stay silent so we don't lose our opportunities. But this has to change. A murmur rippled through the room, and Zoe realized she had captured everyone's attention. She continued, her words growing more powerful. We can no longer allow studio owners, directors, and everyone in positions of power to feel untouchable. We need real change. We need respect, equality, and above all, a voice. The applause began to echo, first from a small group, but soon it spread like wildfire. Zoe smiled, a smile that mixed relief and pride. She had done it. She had told her story, and in doing so, she felt she was raising other voices that had been silenced just as hers once had been. As the conference unfolded, journalists asked questions, and Zoe responded with honesty. One reporter, with a curious look, asked, "Zoe, do you feel safe now that you've decided to speak out publicly?" It wasn't an easy decision, she admitted. But I realize that if we don't speak, nothing will change. And insecurity is part of the price we pay for fighting for justice. I choose this fight because I know it's worth it. The next day brought a flood of news about the scandal. The studio owner, who had always belittled her, was fired and was now facing a wave of lawsuits. Public support for Zoe was overwhelming, and she knew her voice had become a symbol of resistance. Zoe's transformation wasn't just about personal success, it was about community. She began receiving messages from other women sharing their stories and thanking her for having the courage to speak up. A young model named Anna sent a message that deeply touched her. "Zoe, you gave me hope. I've faced similar situations, and you inspired me to tell my story." Zoe realized that her fight reflected the struggles of many others. So, she decided to dedicate herself to creating a support platform for women facing discrimination in the fashion industry. Together, they could share their experiences, support one another, and fight for meaningful change. One sunny afternoon, Zoe organized a gathering in a local park. Women of different ages and backgrounds came together. Some were aspiring models, others were already successful, and some worked behind the scenes in the industry. Seeing all those women together, Zoe felt a wave of emotion. "Thank you for being here," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "This is just the beginning. Together, we can make a difference. If one of us rises, we all rise. Let's create a space where everyone can be heard and respected." The women began to share their stories. Zoe listened intently, offering words of comfort and inspiration. The pain and struggle were palpable, but there was also a sense of solidarity that warmed her heart. They discussed how they could unite, create campaigns, and even form an alliance with modeling agencies that valued diversity and inclusion. Over time, Zoe became a respected figure in the industry. Her journey wasn't just about the glamour of the runways, but about the real fight for justice. She began receiving invitations to speak at events, where she talked about the importance of representation and respect in fashion. Once, during a lecture, a young woman stood up and asked, "Zoe, what would you say to someone who's afraid to speak up?" Zoe smiled. "I'd say that fear is normal, but don't let it hold you back. When you speak, you're not just fighting for your truth, you're paving the way for others. Every voice matters. And when we speak together, we're stronger." Zoe's impact on the fashion industry spread like a fire that couldn't be extinguished. She became an advocate for women's rights, and her story inspired countless others to speak out. In the end, it wasn't just about personal success, it was about creating a legacy of change and empowerment. When she looked back, Zoe didn't just see the insecure young woman who had been humiliated, but a strong, courageous woman who had found her voice. And that voice now echoed everywhere, resonating with the strength of all the women who had come before her and those still to come. As we reflect on Zoe's journey, we see much more than just a story of success in the fashion world. Her path reminds us that even in the most difficult situations, it's possible to find the strength to fight for what we believe in. Zoe teaches us that every obstacle can be transformed into an opportunity for growth, that every voice has the power to ignite change, and that when we stand together, we are capable of creating something much greater than ourselves. Just as Zoe found her voice, maybe this is your chance to find yours. And remember, when we rise together, we are unstoppable. If this story inspired you, made you reflect, or gave you a new perspective on your own journey, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, Radio Life Stories. Here, every story might be your story. Like, comment, share with someone who needs to hear this message, and stay tuned for our next episodes. More inspiring stories are on the way. Until next time, and may every step you take lead you toward your own voice and strength.